welcome friends to this NPTEL MOOC module on international trade theories and empirics. We are on the last week of the complete module. Therefore, we are targeting to explain some cases based on the experience of different countries in the world and how they have experienced the growth, and how that has been sustainable over the time. Now, therefore, we have already started discussing about East Asian miracle in the previous lecture. Now, we are continuing that topic for the explanation. We discussed about their growth path, the change from 1960s till 2000, but majorly we are counting till 60s till 90. In different decades, we have targeted to discuss about the growth path adopted by these top economies in the world. So, we have also discussed about the import substitution industrialization and export oriented industrialization policy, but majority of the countries that we already highlighted that they abolished, they dropped down the idea of IS strategy, they went for adoption of export oriented industrialization structure. So, now that has appeared like the countries which transport from ISI oriented industrialization to export oriented industrialization structure. For policy, they adopted the export orientation industrialization at a very earlier stage, which has achieved higher income growth. So, the flying geese model we already discussed in our model earlier to discuss about the growth path. Now, that is akin to the product cycle theory, also explain about the adoption of different strategies in those East Asian economy. Now, the argument like infant industry protection we have said already, we mentioned, but that was related to the IS strategy, and in the infant industry protection they those country I think overcome with the problems of protection, and they went for export orientation that has been talked already. Those countries which are not well endowed with with natural resources appear to have started export oriented industrial policy, like some of the cases where US aid was also important. And so, why did ISI oriented policy not work effectively in some of those areas? That is a question must be addressed. So, like ISI turned out to be ineffective, though we have discussed they did not promote further on ISI, but why that turned out to be ineffective can be understood from this slide. Now, ISI tends to focus on consumer goods, still requires intermediate goods, raw materials, capital goods to produce. So, the ISI which we have already discussed in our previous two lectures, that largely focused on the consumer goods. So, the countries concerned were more focused on their growth path. They discuss about intermediate goods, either raw materials or capital goods to produce. The market for ISI goods is not that big when the domestic income level is not high. So, the ISI goods whichever are available, therefore, since lots of restrictions are imposed on the imports on the foreign exporters. So, ISI goods is not that big when the domestic income level is not high. So, the market for ISI goods is obviously not expected to be higher when lots of restrictions are there, because only domestic income may not be sufficiently explain the market. Coming to the ISI context 1.7, this tends to focus on downstream industries. So, it creates less ripple effects on other industries. So, first of all ISI emphasizes on specific industries for sure. So, it has a less ripple effect on other industries, since large scale productivity will not be derive out of this strategy. ISI involves distorted allocation of resources, mainly rent seeking, but this is also applicable to experimentation IP policy. So, coming to the countries with weak exports are subject to shortage in terms of their income. So, that has created balance of payment crisis. So, India adopted that, and that has led to balance of payment crisis in the beginning of late 80s and beginning of 90s. So, that was a measure of concern. So, now let us understand a few on why did not some GIs leave ISI. Newly industrializing economy like the NIE in short, 4 countries are there. Those who left ISI industrial policy industrial policy at a very early stage, but Asian countries kept clinging to that ISI. Why? Because of some evidences of agriculture dominance as well as some infant industry issues. So, Asian countries are rich in natural resources like Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand. We have already discussed in the previous lecture that those countries, 4 important countries did not pick up did not promote for export orientation from the beginning. So, like Indonesia, we have figures for higher repository for oil, natural gas. Malaysia is very famous for rubber and tin. Then Thailand, rice and other agricultural products. So, now so obviously it is important to mention that why these countries did not leave the ISI strategy. Exports of natural resources made it easier for these countries to have access to foreign currency, okay, and so no urgent necessity to create export industries in that particular countries. Export of natural resources made them easier for these countries to have access to foreign currency. Since they have very important natural resources, they could able to access foreign currencies quickly. So, they did not find necessary to adopt export promotion rather than import substitution. Now, those which left ISI, what are the argument behind it and what are the cases like those who left import substitution installation, countries like Japan and Korea, so and later on Taiwan. These countries were strategically important countries for the US, but could not continue receiving aid from the US. So, like growth in export enabled these nations to have access to foreign technology and raw materials. These countries climbed up the ladders of industrial development while protecting inefficient sectors from international competition. So, that was another important aspects for discussion. Now, those which clung to the ISI experienced high economic stagnation. As I already cited, India is also an example for that. In the late in the 80s in Indian case, and in East Asian countries, those were clung it for long. In the very early 80s, economic stagnations were reported. Then those countries also started to recognize the value of export led growth, and they also tried to follow the rear of the flying geese. Flying geese are the avenues of potential benefit could be tapped, and that has already been explained in the earlier module of our international trade paper. So, some of them decided to take a shortcut, that is financial liberalization, creation of offshore market and FDI. So, with this I think we have discussed about industrial import substitution installation, then export oriented policy. We have compared 5 decades of data, then we cited the World Bank data to explain and support our argument. Then at the end we also explain the rationale behind not adopting ISI, and largely it is due to the stagnation in their economy. and there are some natural resources also, infant industrial protection in between we explain to identify the ISI and export orientation or export oriented industrialization policy. Also we have cited the East Asian miracle to argue the development through international trade theory. So, those are all the lectures on this, and in the next class we will explain about the recent crisis and how it has impacted the economic development. So, trade and development through post COVID experience will be explained in next two lectures to wind up the complete the module. Thank you. With this, let me stop here. Thank you.